Welcome back to another edition of Political Breakfast, heard right here on WABE. I'm Lisa Ram. So glad that you are here, and our loyal strategists are also here today. Republican strategist Brian Robinson and Democratic strategist Tharon Johnson. Hello to both of you.
Hey there. Good morning.
Hello.
It's been a minute since we've all been together. It's a busy season for both of you, isn't it?
Yes. I am in Macon today meeting with candidates, doing some trainings for people who are going to be on the ballot this November. So I'm going to be doing that really this entire week. So it is the season for that kind of work.
Yeah, and I want to jump right into this because it is the season. This is a very important and intense political season ahead of the November general election. You two are strategists. Everybody knows that. We say that every week. And both of you are very open about what you do for a living. But Brian, I have to say recently we've got a lot of listeners expressing concern about your role with the Rick Jackson for Governor campaign. And most important, how they feel it appears unethical when you express your personal views about his opponent in the race, Keisha Lance Bottoms. So I just wanted to give you an opportunity to respond to that. You know, you always issue a note of disclosure that you do serve as an advisor, but is there anything you want to say about perception?
I'm more than happy to, and I welcome that conversation, and I totally respect the viewpoints of those who have raised that flag. And I want to say I appreciate people taking an interest in the show and engaging with us. I think that's fantastic and that's healthy. I also think we need to look at the context that we're in here. This show has been going on for more than a decade now, and I hope that our listeners over that time have come to trust me as an analyst and an advocate on this show. I am a Republican, and I wear that badge on this show just as Tharon wears the Democrat badge on this show. And we have been fair analysts throughout all of this time that we've been on. The fact that I do have a role does reflect the fact, as I always say here, I do not play a political operative on radio and TV. I am one. I do not pay my mortgage by being on Political Breakfast or any other media outlet. I can assure you, Tharon can attest to that as well, that this is something we do out of a passion for it and for a love of the game. And really, we love the engagement with the listeners. Well, we hear about it everywhere we go. I think that the analyst role in media is more important in a primary where, you can be expressing favorable perspectives of your client in that when there's not a lot separating the candidates based on policy. It's a little different in a general election because I always wear the Republican jersey, and this is a jersey versus jersey matchup at this juncture. So what I am saying about the general election race, I will be fair about in the analysis of what's going on and provide listeners with context and understanding of what's happening and why. But at the same time, when it comes to me being a Republican, I am a Republican. And I would be saying what I had to say about the general election regardless of whether or not I had a role in the Rick Jackson campaign. I will always disclose it, and I will never lie. I will always be honest, or I will not engage if there comes a point where it becomes unethical or a conflict for me to do so. I'm happy to take a pass every once in a while on things where, my role as an advisor is a conflict.
All right. Well, I appreciate you for giving us that perspective. Tharon, you can understand the concern, right? Years ago, you served as an advisor to the Keisha Bottoms for Atlanta mayor campaign. And I'm guessing you have people stopping and asking you, are you still working for her? And are you on her gubernatorial campaign? So talk about the gray area when it comes to your encounters with people and give us your perspective.
Well, I want to go back to the inception of this show, Lisa. And when we started this over a decade ago, it was primarily an opinion/analysis, but more importantly, civil program that all listeners in 90.1 WABE NPR could listen to. Now, every time there's an actual election, to B. Rob's point, when a general election happens, you got President Biden against Donald Trump. You now got Keisha Lance Bottoms against Rick Jackson. You have different competitors. I remember vividly when Stacey Abrams was going up against Brian Kemp in 2018 and in 2022. So as Brian talks about, we then have to put on that hat. However, I go back to the analysis and the opinion. Yes, we try to give an analysis, and Lisa, you do a fantastic job of keeping us in line and factual. However, we do have to express our opinions. And that's one of the reasons why we are strategists, and people, talk to us. They give us information. We ask people information because we want to come on the show and give our listeners the best information possible. Now, do we put a little bit of our personal slant on the information? Absolutely. Now, I want to say this from the listeners. I am getting in the public, hey, Brian is working for Rick Jackson. Can he be objective? Well, I will say this, Brian, he's right. He has a job to do. I mean, he's disclosed who he's worked for, Raffensperger, Carr, Jackson, Speaker Burns. I mean, he talks about that. And so I would just encourage our listeners to know that, okay, yes, that I do understand your concern about him being a paid person in the campaign, in the primary, and also in the general. But knowing that he has that access to these individuals, these stakeholders, actually provides you with a lot of good information that you can take back to your different family members and friends and share. The last thing I would say is this. Absolutely, Lisa, it depends on which bio you read. Sometimes when I go around, people mention that I was an advisor to the 2017 Keisha Lance Bottoms campaign for mayor. If you pull my bio, people will say I worked for Kasim Reed. When he was running against Andre Dickens this last time, I have to remind people I managed the 2009 race. I didn't manage the 2021 race. Biden Harris, I was the advisor there. And so, again, I want to say this to our listeners. I understand your concern. I am hearing it, Lisa. And I think what it also kind of boils down to is when Brian has the floor and he speaks, even though he discloses it, it definitely puts him in a position where he's kind of speaking on behalf of the campaign. Whereas with me, I am not employed by the Keisha Lance Bottoms campaign. But however, I want her to win. I want her campaign, her followers, her friends, more importantly, her mama, to know that I'm going to promote and defend her on this show. But I think the difference is, which to our listeners, we understand, Brian is a paid consultant to the Rick Jackson campaign. I'm not. That may or may not change. But ultimately, what we're trying to do on this show is give you insider information with a little bit of opinion from us. And of course, it doesn't get combative. And if it does, it's okay, because honestly, that's just the climate that we live in right now. So Lisa, thank you so much for giving us an opportunity to do this. And more importantly, to Brian's point, we do not make our living on this podcast. All right. There's so many other things that I do. I probably have way more jobs than B-Rock, but right now he's in the fight of his life in the gubernatorial race. Mm-hmm. And so in order for us to provide for our families, put food on the table, we have to work. We have to do things. I always disclose I'm a lobbyist. Brian is not a lobbyist. I'm a registered lobbyist. But Brian does a lot of communications work. I do some communications work, not as much as him. And so I think that's the thing, Lisa, that when you go back to the inception, we earned the right to be here because we won. We've had some losses too, but more importantly, we usually win, and we usually have the trust of these campaigns and these candidates and these elected officials to come on the show and try to convey to the best of our ability the opinions and factual analysis that we can provide.
And quickly, your response to those who say it's unethical, Brian.
I am not a journalist. I do not pretend to be a journalist. I am an advocate. I am a Republican spokesperson. That is the role that I play here, and it is reflective of what I do here. So often when you have analysis that's just left to journalists are not political operatives. They do not have the inside information or skill level of what it takes to operate within a campaign. And so having people who have been in the trenches provides a level of analysis and depth that you simply don't get if you have analysis from people who are outside of the business. And that's what we hope to provide here. And listeners can take my disclosures, distill it, and make their own decisions about what I am saying. But I am not here, let me make this very clear, I am not here to campaign against Keisha Lance Bottoms. What we are doing here is providing analysis of the race. And I will talk sometimes about what her weaknesses are in the race, what Republicans are going to go after, how Republicans are going to draw contrast with her and the Democrats. That's all fair game. And I hope people can learn from it and have a deeper understanding of what's happening in our politics.
Yeah. You both have to have pretty thick skin, right? I think, Brian, you went on V103 not too long ago, and boy, were they mad at V103 for letting you on there and saying what you had to say. So you really have to have some thick skin, right?
Absolutely. And look, as you guys know, I do this show. I'm the only white person on this show. So I do a lot of stuff with my black friends, right? And so I was getting lit
Or
up by
you're
my
the
black
minority.
friends.
Okay,
I was
right.
getting lit up by them last week because I had taken over their social media feeds, much to my ignorance. I had no idea what was going on out there until people sent it to me and kind of find out there were, thousands of comments, thousands of shares, and it was crazy. And, look, I think going on black platforms like that is hugely important for Republicans. I believe in it. I believe in talking to all voters. And some people don't want to hear another perspective. And look, that's true on my side too. Like, if I put Tharon on conservative talk radio and he said some of the stuff that's in the Democrat talking points, they'd be talking about what a dirtbag he is and how they should never platform this guy. It'd be the exact same thing. So we're not unique in that. But Tharon made the point that a lot of this is tribalized right now, and this is indicative of that. It's not just I'm for my team. It's I don't want to hear what the other team has to say, period.
Yeah, he's. You mentioned Rick Jackson reaching out to black-owned businesses, and a popular black-owned brunch spot, notice toasted on Lenox, facing backlash today over Rick Jackson's Instagram photo with the owner, Tamara Young. Some are calling for a boycott of the restaurant. Tharon, I don't know. What are your thoughts there? I know you heard about that over the weekend.
So as someone who actually has been in a ownership of a restaurant and also works with a lot of restaurants in my professional capacity, let me just say a couple things. As a restaurant owner, as a restaurant investor, and in this case, Toast, there's two owners. The chef also is a part owner along with a young lady you just mentioned. You can't stop people from coming into your restaurant. All right. You can set ground rules. You can set dress codes. You can put a code of conduct. You wait outside. This is how our reservations are. These are all the things that you can kind of control. You can even ask someone to politely leave if they are disorderly. These are all the rules that comes along for a restaurant. So that leads me into how do we get to this point, Lisa? Now, I don't have any facts to back this up, but let me just tell you from my restaurant and also political experience. Rick Jackson is the Republican gubernatorial nominee. He travels with a few people. There's no way, I believe, that Rick Jackson just stumbled upon Toast Restaurant. So they had to actually have some notification that he was coming. All right, that's number one. Number two, once he gets there, and this is the question, how did they communicate it amongst their customer base? Not saying that all black people go to Toast. One thing about Toast, I have been there a few times, they have a very diverse consumer base, people who patronize the restaurant. But the majority of the people that are there, Lisa, are black people. It's my people. It's a culture. So, okay, you invite them there, and then we don't know what was discussed, all right? So what was promised, what was discussed? And so the first time we learned about another visit from Rick Jackson was when it was posted on the internet by his campaign and also by the ownership at Toast. I do not support a boycott. I'm never going to support a black-owned business unless they've done something intentionally and discriminatory wrong to target a particular group of people. No, we should not boycott them. However, it goes back to Lisa to that cognitive part of the brain, and that is that, hey, we are living in a very tribal society right now. In black women in particular, who 600,000 of them have been fired and laid off from federal jobs. We see what Donald Trump is doing to this country, and what the Jackson campaign and the Toast ownership had to realize that if we post this picture and if we have this meeting and how it's going to be conveyed to our consumer base, we just got to make sure that it doesn't do anything to harm the business. Now, the third thing is that when, Rick Jackson should be commended for trying to expand his outreach, right? That's to be commended. However, Keisha Lance Bottoms doesn't have to start going to black-owned restaurants. She's been going there all of her life. She released a video, talked about her grandfather and her mother and others and their role in black businesses. But when you start going to these restaurants where you have no credibility, no history of going there and not only just patronizing it, but just showing support. Like, have you delivered some money, grants? Have you participated in some of the programs? Then I think the Jackson campaign had to know that they had a goal, and that was the optics of them trying to reach across the aisle and go and support small businesses. That's understandable. But when you do that and you post it, consequently, what has happened, Lisa, is that this business now has lost upwards to over 30% of its clientele because of a picture and because of what Rick Jackson is associated with. And so it's very hard for the campaign to separate the two and say, hey, I want to be just like Trump. I want to be the best governor Trump can be a part of with a Southern tone. He makes these comments about being departed and deported, has really no credit, has no consistent record politically of delivering for small Black owned businesses, particularly small restaurants. And so then when you post a picture, in this climate, there were a lot of people, not just Black people, by the way, who said that this was wrong. Last thing I would say is this. What I don't like, and I'm going to call it out, I don't want my white friends to start saying, well, I'm just going to go by there then because all the Black people want to, boycott. No, not all the Black people want to boycott. A lot of my friends went by Toast this weekend, and I'm actually going to go by there this week, Lisa. I'll post a picture and put it in our group chat so you can see me there. Not because I'm trying to respond to Rick Jackson and the ownership, but because I have consistently supported Black businesses. But what I'm not going to let some white people do is bring this level of sort of colonizing this movement, like, okay, well, all we were trying to do is help her, and all we were trying to do is go over there and show that we want support. No. You don't get to do that. We're not going backwards. You knew what you were doing before you went there. It backfired, unfortunately. Rick Jackson will continue to go to other facilities. I would hope, and B-Rob, I'm sure, is going to tell them this message, just do a little bit more due diligence. The barbershop, we let you get away with that, okay? It was a little uproar. We're like, okay, you played in our face with the barbershop. Then you went to the Mexican restaurant. Okay, that's fine. You're trying to reach out. But when you played in our face and you went to Toast and you posting the pictures and there really wasn't anything that came out of me, we don't know the questions. We don't know what the outcome was. I just think that, I would have probably advised the campaign and Toast to let's nuance this a little differently. Like maybe let's actually invite customers in to come meet Rick Jackson. But it just did not look and feel right. But listen, Toast will be fine. Let's wrap our arms around the owners, you all, for those who go there. Let's make sure we go to the restaurant. Let's not let this Black business fail. But that is my analysis, and that's kind of my response to it politically, and it's also somebody who's actually been in the restaurant business.
Yeah. Brian, before you get in, let me tell you what Toast co-owner Tharon Young said. She said Jackson was visiting the restaurant as a customer and simply gave him great service and hospitality, and even further clarified that the business does not endorse Rick Jackson. And she says that any statements made in that Jackson post were his own and do not represent our personal beliefs or the position of Toast on Lenox. So that is Tharon Young's response. Brian, go ahead.
And real quick, Lisa, if I can, we don't know Rick Jackson's response because they took the post down. So for our listeners, the reason why I can't recite additionally of what Lisa has said to what Rick Jackson actually put out there, the Jackson campaign took the post down because it was going too viral, negatively impacting the business. I'm sorry. I just want to make sure we get that in.
Mm-hmm.
The campaign took it down because it did not want the restaurant owner to pay a consequence for Rick Jackson coming in and doing a stop at a restaurant and getting a meal. He had the lobster and waffles, by the way, and he raves about the lobster and waffles. He highly recommends that you go and get
their food is phenomenal. Yeah.
Yes. And so one good thing that's come out about this, out of this circumstance, is a lot of people have been talking about what high quality this restaurant is. So kudos to them on that. And yes, I do plan. I don't mean to offend Tharon, but I do want to go now and try these lobsters and waffles now that it's been brought to my attention. It's not terribly far from my house. And, I want to go and support a business that's being targeted. I saw this happen to a barbecue place in Marietta owned by a white man who did an ad last year in favor of the tax cuts in the federal tax bill. And all of these Democrats, seeing him in the commercial, went and gave him a 1-star review on the online reviews, just simply because they disagreed with him on a political issue. And one that's not even that edgy. This is about tax cuts, not some social issue that divides us with such passion. It's disgusting to attack people for being welcoming and letting people come into your restaurant. And what this is partisanship on display, and it gets a little bit uglier when you overlay a racial element to it. And I think we're seeing that here as well. Rick Jackson, Greg Dolezal, Mike Collins, Tim Fleming, Brian Strickland, you're going to see all of them go out there and campaign for votes in every corner of the state. You know who benefits from that? Voters of all races and ethnicities and religions. If parties are competing for your vote, you have a seat at the table. Your voice gets louder. This is good for those people who haven't been interested in Republicans in the past, to have Republicans show up in their establishments, in their communities, in their institutions, and compete for their votes. Because Democrats could take for granted the black vote in Georgia and around the country for a long time. Now it's up for grabs, and there's a little bit of anger that it's up for grabs. Now there's anger that there's competition for. Like the competition isn't supposed to be allowed. And that's my problem. I think this is good for the black community. It's good for the Latino community, Asian American community. If Republicans are out there saying, here's my plan to make your life and your family's circumstances better, that's fantastic.
But my only pushback, B-Rob, is what you just said is not what the candidates are saying, okay? Maybe that came out in the barbershop visit. I'll give you guys credit there, right? But we never heard the questions that were asked at the barbershop visit, right? But on behalf of the campaign. But we heard Rick Jackson's answers. We didn't hear anything from the Mexican restaurant, right? And correct me if I'm wrong. You know, I'm in these streets every day, but I can be corrected. But Rick Jackson did not go direct to camera or send a message out and said, based on my meeting with Toast Restaurant, I am going to commit to A, B, C, D, and E. And I'm going to then go and do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. None of that was happening. So the competition, yeah, fine. Come on. Like, you know, B-Rob, you know this. Majority of the audiences that we go around the state of Georgia, what is the makeup of the audience? It's 90% white. But I go, I say what I have to say, and I'm welcome. Now I get criticized because I am not like them. Like, I mean, but it's brave and it's courageous and it's always good to go into those rooms. Until Rick Jackson, Mike Collins, and all those other white men that you just mentioned, the Republican Party, actually show some substantive plan and platform, then I think majority of people who patronize these restaurants and these barbershops will be open to it. But right now it's kind of appearing as if it's a photo op. Now, the last thing I'll say is this. You're absolutely right, B-Rob. Keisha Lance Bottoms, John Ossoff, and all these black women that are on the ticket on the Democratic side, because, you know, we got all black women and white men. We have no black men and no white women on the Democratic ticket, right? And so they better get into these white, Hispanic, Asian areas as well. And I know that they're already doing it. And I think this is a good lesson learned from what happened at Toast. And so I want to see Keisha Lance Bottoms go over to Tommy's Barbershop on West Paces Ferry, B-Rob. I mean, I want to see John Ossoff go to some black barbershops. He needs to go to some black areas. And I want to see, Tanya Miller go down to a rattlesnake roundup in South Georgia and Middle Georgia. I really want to see that, and I think that's going to be so important where Peter Hubbard, who is the PSC nominee, and Sheila Edwards, that they need to get out here and not just talk to people who are anti-data center. Go talk to some folks who are pro-data centers, right, if we're trying to win in November. So, Lisa, it's very tribal right now. But again, if they're going to come with some actual plans to help these businesses, I'm all for it. But I just haven't seen that yet, and I know it will come. But, to give them a little bit of understanding, I know they're trying, but it just really goes back to, do you have a consistent record? Do you have credibility? Like, have you been doing that before you became a candidate? And that's one of the reasons why me and Brian always tell people when they run for office, make sure you spend time in the community first. The first time that they should not be hearing from you is when you're a candidate for whatever office.
I do want to address some of that because I think some of it's a misunderstanding. These events that we've been talking about are retail stops. They're going in, shaking hands, chit-chatting with folks. They are not getting up, giving a speech, and laying out policy ideas. You're going to hear lots of policy ideas from Keisha Lance Bottoms and from Rick Jackson and all the other candidates on the ballot. The purpose of these really is getting out there, talking to voters, hearing what they have to say, not so much making it about you and your platform. And one thing that I want to address in Tharon's comments about what are your ideas to help these types of businesses. One thing you're not going to see from Republicans is we're going to do X specifically for businesses that are owned by somebody who meets X demographic, right? We're not going to do that. It's going to be about the business climate. It's going to be about helping entrepreneurs. It's going to be about keeping taxes and regulations low, something that applies across the board to everybody. That's how Republicans are going to approach this. it will not be through an identity politics lens that Democrats have come to expect. One thing that I think is going to be a great note and a great consequence in Georgia politics, we'll see if my theory is right, is a lot of your black voters, who are obviously the biggest Democratic voter group in the state of Georgia, are amongst the most conservative or moderate members of the Democratic coalition. And we are seeing a burgeoning class of entrepreneurs. We're also seeing, more so than ever before in history, a strong black middle and now upper class, including people that are amongst our friends. And that's fantastic. And as those economic circumstances, as those educational levels, as those business opportunities change, so do people's politics. And so I do think that the evolution of our politics will change as some white college-educated voters in Metro Atlanta have drifted from the Republicans to the Democrats over the last decade. I think you're going to see some of this black entrepreneurial class, people very interested in the business climate, beginning to take a look at the Republicans.
Well, real quick, Lisa, it's not about identity politics, and B-Rob knows this. It's about building a winning coalition. All right. In order to build a winning coalition, you do have to identify what issues drives a certain constituency base more than others. B-Rob knows this. One of the things that they are always talking about is, and you just heard it, they're targeting African-American and Hispanic voters. They've been doing it for the last 3 or 4 election cycles, right? Now, they'll put out a plan that's a general plan, but don't get it twisted to our listeners. They're definitely saying certain things that they've been able to identify through focus groups, retail stops, polling to show that that particular demographic group will become more acceptable to a Republican message. We're doing the same thing on the Democratic side, which is why I said to Democrats, let's continue, not start, let's continue to focus on different demographic groups across the state of Georgia. And more importantly, what Keisha Lance Bottoms announced last week is that she's going to these rural counties, Lisa, so they won't be able to peg her as just an Atlanta metro area Democratic candidate. No, she's spending time in these rural counties. And so, no, we're not going to do identity politics, B-Rob, but what we are going to do is that the same thing you guys would do is that if you start coming over to our most loyal constituency base and you're trying to go to them and tell them that they can do you can do more than what we're doing, yeah, we're going to compete with that. If you go to them and say, hey, I just want a photo op, but I'm not leaving there with any substantive things that have come out of that, we're going to remind them, hey guys, what did you ask for? Like this guy could win, he could lose, but why would you let him come into your business and not sort of pose questions and identify? That's the same way you have these debates, same way you fill out questionnaires, same way you have forums. And so that's it. But look, Lisa, I think ultimately we spent enough time on this. But again, guys, support Toast. B-Rob, how about this? I'm going to go by and get that lobster waffle with you.
Okay, let's do it.
Let's do it. And then, but
that's a photo op.
No, we're gonna let's go by there this week. Now I know you gallivanting all across the state. You know, you got your big clients. You know, I ain't gonna success shame you, brother. I want you to make your money. But maybe on Friday, why don't we pull up at Toast and make sure you got to get some chicken wings. Now, if you're gonna be about the culture, you got to get some chicken wings. All right. So
I'm all about
you like
that.
Your flavor. I'm more of a lemon pepper kind of crispy wet guy.
So is Quinn, my daughter. She's
okay. Well, bring Quinn. Yes. So we're gonna
the
go
family
support
affair.
Toast.
Yeah, get that snapshot. So this is a good time to take a break and think about and envision those wings that Tharon has been talking about. We're going to come back and talk about polling in the Georgia's governor race and some other top races. We'll be back in a moment. Welcome back to Political Breakfast. I've been talking with Democratic strategist Tharon Johnson and Republican strategist Brian Robinson about the Toast on Lennox controversy. Rick Jackson stopped by, had breakfast there, and took a photo that went viral. Also, we talked about how both of you can actually get the real-world experience working on past and present campaign trails. But a lot of people want to know how that mixes and mingles with what you do here on Political Breakfast. Well, here's something that you both do very well, and that's the polls, the new polls. They're coming out one after the other, and you're able to pick them apart and kind of navigate those polls for us. A new poll released recently shows Democrats hold an early advantage in the Georgia's governor race and in the race for lieutenant governor. These are the results of the State Navigate poll. And it focused mainly on undecided voters. And it feels like undecided voters have I don't know, been kind of left out of the loop because, like we said last week, so many people seem to be decided. But what's your perspective on this latest poll and the fact that undecided voters are being given a voice here? Tharon, you first.
Well, thank you, Lisa, for allowing us to really analyze, which I think, and correct me if I'm wrong here, B. Rob, there's been 3 polls that have come out since the primary election. We can remind our listeners that Rick Jackson went to a runoff with Burt Jones, and so he did not become the Republican nominee until June of this year, but Keisha Lance Bottoms won her May primary without a runoff. And so the 3 polls, to me, combined show different things, but there are some similarities. And so let's start on the similarities. Number one, horse race number, if the election is today, clearly Jon Ossoff has a bigger lead over Mike Collins, and then Keisha Lance Bottoms has a slight lead over Rick Jackson. And in 2 of the polls, they force you to actually pick a person. And so in one poll, it had a better sort of depiction of more undecided. So a lot of the undecideds right now are saying, hey, in the governor's race, my candidate, he did not make it. Or, in the case with Amanda Duff in the primary for Democrat, there was another woman in the race, clearly, but she didn't get the attention. But there were 2 women running for governor on the Democratic side. We know all white men pretty much on the Republican side. And I think also the undecideds are saying, hey, I want to wait and actually see what the policy proposals are going to be from these candidates. And so that is a very, very encouraging sign for Keisha Lance Bottoms and Jon Ossoff, but particularly for Keisha Lance Bottoms for a little bit of a different reason. As she travels around the state of Georgia, we saw a report last week that she's going to about a dozen plus of counties that are in rural Georgia. These are counties where she not only did well during the primary. We know she won every single county except one during the primary season, but these are counties that they believe, based on their insider information, that they are going to be able to be competitive in these counties. Now, it's not a either or. She's also visiting a lot of cities in the metro area as well. So she's on the road. She's out there campaigning very hard, but she also needs to raise the money. And so now when she gets into these rooms and she can say to these potential donors, this is the first time in Georgia in 20 years where a Democrat has consistently led in early polling. That helps with fundraising. That helps her attract talent to actually come to the state to work for her. And it sort of, Lisa, answers the one question that you and myself probably get in our community, and that is Georgia ready to elect a black governor? They've already elected a black senator and a Jewish U.S. senator, but are they ready to elect a black governor, particularly a black woman governor? And while the campaign has shied away from that, and I think that's very strategic and that's smart, let's not make that be the lead as far as Keisha Lance Bottoms' candidacy. Let's really focus on the content of her character, the issues that she's running on, but you can't get away from it. And so, again, if these poll numbers consist in the next 30 days, that's really, really good momentum for the Democrats. But here's my only warning shot before I know B. Rob is going to respond to this, is that Rick Jackson and Mike Collins, with all of their support with the different organizations, when they decide to engage with the negative ads, you will see this race tighten. But also, I want to let our listeners know, particularly Democrats, don't worry. Keisha Lance Bottoms and Jon Ossoff, along with the coordinated campaign, DGA, DCCC, DSCC, all these different organizations, they are going to go on the attack and negative ads on Rick Jackson and Mike Collins as well. And so we just got to let the ads kind of play itself out, let the ground games continue to build, and then we'll check back on where we are. But right now, 3 consecutive polls showing Democrats in the lead clearly is showing the electricity and the momentum on the ground for us.
Yeah. So, Brian, is that indicating an unstable political environment for Georgia Republicans?
I am thrilled with where we are in this polling, actually, because the environment nationally has been very much in favor of the Democrats. In 2025 and the off year, where we had special elections and then we had that standalone Public Service Commission election, we saw a tremendous Democrat advantage in the electorate. The House Republicans, state House Republicans, lost a seat in Oconee and Clark counties, Watkinsville, Athens area, by huge margin in a district that the Republican before had won by 20 points, just less than a year before that election, that special election day. So a lot of environmental issues are of concern. To see Rick Jackson basically within the margin of error in these is great news for Republicans. And in fact, one of those polls, those three that Tharon mentioned, had Rick Jackson up a point, obviously within the margin of error, but it just shows that it's a horse race. It's highly competitive. And that's what Republicans expect. And one thing we've discussed here is the demographic change that we've seen in Georgia. Since Brian Kemp was elected by only 55,000 votes or thereabouts in 2018, the state has seen a tremendous growth of minority residents and a net loss of white residents. So you have groups that traditionally have been Democrat coming in massive numbers, 500,000, and then the group white voters who traditionally been Republicans here who tend to be leaving the state in some small numbers. So you see some demographic advantages for the Democrats leading into this election. Republicans have to go and get a lot of minority votes or you can't win. That's why you see Rick Jackson going to barbershops and black-owned businesses and openly competing for votes that traditionally have been assumed to be Democrat. Wow. So I do want to pick apart a little bit of this last poll. The sample is skewed Democrat. That first poll that had Ossoff up double digits over Mike Collins reflected the census population of the state, not the electoral population of the state, not actual likely voters. And so, if you just go out and, vote, talk to a bunch of people who are registered but not likely to vote, Democrats are going to have an advantage in that sample, no doubt about it. We're seeing that again. One thing that causes me concern as a Republican is that in that first one and in this latest poll, they forced voters to make a decision. The middle poll that had Rick Jackson basically tied allowed for you to say you were undecided. The two that made you decide showed people falling toward the Democrats largely, and that reflects the environment. Now, these are probably not likely voters or not high propensity voters, but nevertheless, some of them are going to show up, and what they are saying does matter. So for Republicans, we fully accept that right now we should be facing a deficit, that Democrats should have a slight advantage in polling. Tharon is right. The campaign messaging hasn't started yet. There's going to be some communications that is aimed at persuasion, and those numbers are going to move a little bit. I think Rick Jackson obviously is going to have a huge spending budget to put stuff out. We'll see how Keisha can compete with that. And what these outside groups, like the Democrat Governors Association that Tharon mentioned, her leadership committee too, which can raise limited funds, just like Rick Jackson has, how much can they raise? Can she compete with Rick Jackson in fundraising? We're already seeing that Mike Collins is going to have a hard time competing with John Ossoff in the Senate race because Ossoff's been really good at it. And Collins basically started out at zero coming out of the primary, whereas John Ossoff, who didn't have a primary, had this nest egg there. So how are those spending disparities going to play out in this race? That'll be hugely important. But do Republicans accept that Democrats might have a lead right now? Absolutely. Sure.
The big news for Democrats, too, and B-Rob saw the same thing I saw, particularly in the state Navigate poll, is that Keisha Lance Bottoms is actually doing better with independents and moderates. And even when we weighted the sample, she still was up by 4 points. And so you've heard me say on this podcast now for over a decade, it's going to come down to roughly about 250,000 plus voters. Many of these women and men are independents, kind of moderate Republicans, moderate Democrats. And so she can hold that lead with the overall independents being weighed correctly as far as Republicans and Democrats. Therein lies, I think, a good opportunity for her, because one of the things that we heard from a lot of Republicans, they felt like Rick Jackson could actually appeal to more of the moderate electorate.
All right, Tharon Johnson is a Democratic strategist, public affairs, and government consultant who has served as an advisor for Keisha Lance Bottoms' 2017 mayoral campaign and as a senior advisor to the Biden Georgian campaign. Brian Robinson is a Republican strategist, communications consultant, and former deputy chief of staff for Governor Nathan Deal, who is now serving as an advisor for the Rick Jackson for Governor campaign. Thank you so much for checking in. Great show, great perspective as always, and we'll do it again next week.
Thanks, guys.
And shout out to Atlanta again, Lisa, real quick. FIFA World Cup. Amazing.
What a match.
And congratulations.
What a match. I know not to say game. What a match.
Spain. Yeah, congratulations on the match to Spain. Big win. I just got to get Tyson off Messi a little bit because people at school talking Messi.
Boy.
But no, congratulations to the city of Atlanta, FIFA World Cup, and Spain.
Yeah. And let me say, just give a warm welcome to President Trump this week. He's coming to Cobb County to talk about the Trump account, which I encourage parents to check out. It's good for your kids.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, guys. See you soon.
Bye, guys.